Today, I'm going to tell you a story about two retirees, Average Andy and Pension Pete. Each is 55 years old, earns the same salary, and saves the same amount every year. However, there's one difference between them. Pension Pete has a pension, while Average Andy does not. We'd expect retirement to be easier for Pension Pete, but how much of a difference will a pension really make? Let's find out, and be sure to stay until the end where I discuss the slow extinction of pension plans in America. Today, around 1 in 5 workers participate in a pension plan, including 76% of state and local government workers and only 12% of private sector workers. When the legislation that created 401k plans was passed in 1978, private companies began a decades-long process of moving away from traditional defined benefit pension plans. Consequently, workers today are increasingly dependent upon their own retirement savings efforts. According to the Pension Rights Center's 2019 data, the median private pension benefit was $10,788 per year. For public sector employees, the median pension benefit was much higher. For federal workers, it was $27,687 per year, and for state and local government workers, it was $22,662 per year. For our example today, we'll say that Pension Pete has a modest pension of $1,000 per month or $12,000 per year when he turns 65 years old. Will such a small pension make a big difference? Let's continue on. For simplicity and consistency, we'll use the same assumptions we've used in prior videos in our calculations. Inflation will be 3% and our expected portfolio returns will be 7%. While I know some of you will find these assumptions dubious in today's environment, they're round numbers close enough to historical data for the purposes of our discussion here. For income, we'll assume they make $90,000 per year. To estimate their Social Security, we'll simply input Andy's and Peter's income into the Social Security quick online calculator to arrive at a monthly benefit. We'll also assume their stay-at-home spouses are eligible for spousal benefits. As for retirement portfolio income, we'll again use the 4% rule. While there are limits to the 4% rule, it's great for these kinds of back-of-the-napkin calculations. For both Andy and Pete, we'll assume they save 7% of their gross income into a tax-deferred retirement account of some sort and 2% into an after-tax investment account. After we calculate and pay taxes, let's assume they just spend whatever's left. That leaves us just under $6,000 per month in spending for each of them. To determine what Andy and Pete will need to save each month for retirement, let's make some assumptions about what they've saved up until this point. Let's say that they have $20,000 in cash accounts, $50,000 in stocks and mutual funds, $300,000 in retirement accounts, bringing their total investments to $370,000. The only real difference between Andy's and Pete's financial position will be Pete's pension. If Andy and Pete plan to retire in 10 years, how much will they need to have saved between now and then? Let's say that both of our retirees have a goal to keep their same spending levels in retirement. In other words, we're not going to reduce their living expenses in retirement in this case. For both Andy and Pete, their monthly living expenses jump from just under $6,000 to just over $8,000 per month at retirement, thanks to inflation. Of course, Social Security benefits will increase annually with a cost of living adjustment. For simplicity, we will assume that Social Security payments increase at the rate of inflation as well. For Average Andy, that leaves a shortfall of $3,756 per month that his investments will need to provide. Using the 4% rule, we find that Andy will need around $1.13 million for retirement in 10 years. So how does a pension affect these numbers for Pension Pete? Since he'll be receiving $1,000 per month from his pension, the monthly income required from his investments drops to $2,756. Using the 4% rule, we find that he will need a retirement portfolio of approximately $827,000 in 10 years. By the way, if you want to run these calculations for yourself, I've created an inexpensive downloadable spreadsheet that you can find at pranawealth.com/resources. You can even add pension income just like we're discussing today. Now that we know how much they'll need in 10 years, are Andy and Pete on track? Based on our assumptions, Pension Pete is good to go. He'll have a little more than he needs when he retires in 10 years. However, average Andy still has some work to do. If he wants to keep up with his current spending in retirement, he'll need to save another $1,600 per month. That's almost $20,000 per year between now and retirement. That may not be feasible. So what happens if Andy is open to reducing his spending in retirement? How much will he need to cut back after he retires to make these numbers work? If we go back and update the math, we find that he'll need to reduce his retirement expenses by 12% to make the numbers work. That's completely reasonable. In the comments sections of prior videos, many of you shared that your retirement expenses were significantly lower than your pre-retirement expenses. That may or may not be true for all retirees. According to these calculations, both Andy and Pete can make retirement work. But that small pension is the difference between keeping your current lifestyle and needing to cut back in retirement. As we know, the 4% rule has limitations. If we run a Monte Carlo analysis for average Andy and Pension Pete using this data, we find that Pete has a very high 90% probability of success, while Andy's probability of success comes in at 67%. That's not terrible, but it means that Andy will have to be much more diligent with his budgeting and investment strategy during his retirement, as we'd expect. Of course, these numbers don't factor in one-time expenses like home improvements, car purchases, nursing home costs, or simply changes in their retirement spending as they age. In comparing average Andy and Pension Pete, we see that even a modest pension can make a big difference when it comes to retirement. Unfortunately, many private companies eliminated their defined benefit pension plans years ago. Not only are pensions expensive to administer, but the company also retains all the risks associated with the investments and payment obligations. As soon as 401k plans became popular in the early 80s, private companies started shutting down their defined benefit pension plans. It was completely logical on their part. However, this took the costs and risks of retirement planning and put them squarely into the hands of the employees. While public sector pensions are still widespread, they're subject to risk too. Unsurprisingly, many states' pension funds are woefully underfunded. Frontline ran a great documentary about Kentucky's state pension fund in 2018 that illustrates the problem. I highly recommend it, and I'll post a link in the show notes below. Since the legislation that created the 401k was passed in 1978, pensions have marched ever closer to extinction. At the time, it was impossible to understand how this slow-motion extinction event would impact retirement planning for Americans. Few workers understood the burden of preparing for retirement that was suddenly thrust upon their shoulders. It's one more reason to bring retirement planning to the front and center of our attention. If you have a pension and have been offered the choice between a pension payout or a lump sum distribution, check out this video. It may be helpful in making your decision. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.